The homeless rate in America is still rising, and many of the people forced into streets won't be casting their ballots on Election Day. According to the annual Homeless Assessment Report to Congress, more than 568,000 people were considered homeless in 2019. That number is likely higher in 2020 as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, of course. A recent study by the National Coalition for the Homeless estimates that only 10% of homeless people in America actually vote in a presidential election. Pine Street Inn, the largest homeless shelter and services provider in New England, is looking to change that. Lyndia Downie is president and executive director of the organization, and she joins us now to discuss how they are making sure this time the homeless have their voices heard. I think this is really, really interesting, and I have to admit, I did not even consider the impact of homeless people voting, how difficult it would be to vote. I didn't think that voting would be a priority if you were homeless. So I'm really glad that you're here, and I'll just be sort of honest about that. Voting can be seen as a luxury if you can't afford, a place to live. And you're not allowed to participate in voting if you often can't sort of prove that you have a location, an address. What is Pine Street Inn doing to shift that mindset amongst the homeless?
We've actually been doing voter registration for a number of years, and it's fascinating because many of the guests and the people who stay at our shelter are interested in registering. There's often misconceptions about, can I vote? I'm homeless. I don't have a permanent address. Well, in Massachusetts, you can use shelter as a permanent address, so you can vote. I often get questions about, I've been in jail, can't vote. Not true, right? In Massachusetts, for the most part, anybody who's been in prison or jail can vote. And so the first thing we do is really tell people, don't assume you can't vote, because you can. This past weekend, we had a number of people from a young person's group called the Ambassadors, who do a number of things to help us out at Pine Street. And, it's a group of young people in their 20s and 30s, and they came in and did voter registration with the guests, walked them through the questions, walked them through the process, made it clear where people could vote, when people could vote, and it was quite successful. I think we had about 70 people register, and we got everything from, I'm really excited about this, to my vote's not going to matter. And so there was a lot of coaching about how important this is, and a lot of back and forth about that. In many ways, if you're homeless, you are heavily reliant at the moment on government help for health care, for housing. And there's a lot at stake for people who are homeless, even though in their day-to-day lives, they're just trying to get by and survive. We want them to understand there's bigger policy issues here to help them get out of homelessness that they should be paying attention to.
So this is such an important subject, Lyndia. So explain to our audience, what are some of the barriers that a homeless person may face when considering participating in an election? You mentioned some of the misconceptions that they may have, but what are some of the actual barriers that they may come across?
Well, I think barrier number one is, if you're staying in shelter, and if you're frankly fortunate enough to have a shelter where you can stay every night, you could use that shelter as an address. But what if you're sleeping in one shelter on Monday and a different shelter on Wednesday? It makes it complicated. So where are you getting your mail? Can you get your mail picked up there on a regular basis? I think the second piece is that when you're homeless, you are so worried about basic survival that registering to vote and then voting is not the first thing on your list. And just so many other things are in the way. Everything from, do you have an ID? You may not have an ID. How do you get an ID? How long will it take? How much does it cost? So I think there's basic things like that. And then the question of, even once you do register, how do you know where to vote? Where's your polling station? If you're going to vote by mail, how do you do that? And so those are all things that I think are legitimate. And then I think in a number of states, depending on if you've been in jail or in prison, some states do prohibit certain categories of people are not allowed to vote. And so that's a barrier for people as well.
You spoke about how, when part of the process for you is also sort of talking to the individuals that you serve about the importance of voting, why they should really take the time out to fill out the paperwork, to get down to the polling centers. What are some of the issues that the people you work with, the homeless people, what energizes them?
I think that people have a stereotype of homelessness that may be true for a small portion of people who are homeless, that, everybody's mentally ill, everybody's, got a substance use disorder. And that's absolutely true for a portion of homeless people, but it's not true for the majority of people. Many people are with us because they've lost a job. We have people who are with us because they had a horrible health care episode. They had cancer or a heart attack, and even though they had health insurance, they couldn't be out of work that long, and so they lost their housing. We have people who were doubled and tripled up during this pandemic and tested positive and were told to leave wherever they were staying because of their COVID status. So the reasons people come to us are varied, but I meet very few people when we do voter registration who don't have an opinion about what's going on in the country, who don't have their own voice and their own ideas about what we should and should not be doing. And honestly, the conversations run from everything from, very local politics to bigger questions. And I will tell you that people have opinions that are very conservative, that are middle of the road, that are probably considered left of the middle of the road. It's fascinating. And so many people do understand that the policies that create homelessness can be impacted by voting. And I think that is the biggest message, and the biggest, I think, misconception is that homeless people don't think about that and don't care about it. Of course they do. They're living it every day, and they do have to think about how do you change policies that may make it harder to get out of homelessness.
Lyndia, it's so important that you were able to join us to talk about this because, and specifically the point that you made about the notion or the misconception that some people have of homeless people in this country. There are homeless families who live out of their cars, but then they drop their kids off at school every single day. They go and they look for jobs. They actually have a life that just simply means that they are not able to come home to a place that they can call their own while they struggle to find themselves out of the dire straits that led them to be homeless. So it's so important that you're here to talk about that. Before we go, just, for people, one of the things, I did a story many, many years ago on homelessness in New York, and I did find that there are a lot of people who go into Apple stores, for example, to check their bank accounts, to do anything that they might need to do online to get online for free. So how would somebody, or if somebody was in dire straits, how would they locate you? What are some of the resources available to them so that they are informed as we are 7 days away from this election, what their rights are?
So I actually think if a lot of our guests use, we have some computers available, but a lot of our guests use actually the Boston Public Library and spend time there and get online there. And, there's lots of information online about voting, both at the very local level and obviously at the national level. And then there's state by state. Typically, Secretary of State has a website. So in Massachusetts, we've used that website a lot. We were able to actually this time, we just had laptops available for people, and we were able to see if they had registered before they became homeless and had a conversation about, gee, you were registered in another town. Do you want to go back there on voting day? How do we help you get there? Do you want to re-register with this address? So there's lots of resources online for people. And in particular, there's a lot of resources about both mail-in and early voting this year. Really, if you go to your state's website, there's information. City of Boston has really terrific information for anybody who's interested in voting this year, where to vote, how to vote. So if you can get online, it's readily available.
Lyndia Downie with Pine Street Inn, which is the largest provider of housing and shelter in New England. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.